Good morning, and welcome to Scam Jam Fairfax 2022. I am Subasati, an AARP Virginia volunteer and community ambassador, and I will be your guide for today's virtual events. I'm joined in the studio by Trudy Murata, who is also a AARP Virginia volunteer and community ambassador. She will be taking your questions for today's presenters in the Zoom chat. AARP is active in many arenas that support individuals as they approach and enter their retirement years. Retirement security is a key focus area, and AARP wants to help ensure that seniors have sufficient resources so that they don't outlive their savings or find their golden years end in poverty. Another area of concentration is preventing financial schemes and other scams targeting not just older adults, but every individual. And that is the subject of today's event. Today's virtual event, Knowledge Gives You Power Over Scammers, is a joint effort between AARP and Fairfax County Government's Silver Shield Task Force to share with you information and tools to recognize scams and frauds in order to protect yourself, your loved ones, and your friends and neighbors. Several of Fairfax County supervisors were instrumental in setting up the Silver Shield Task Force. Joining us today via video is Jeff McKay, Chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors, Mason District Supervisor Penny Gross, and Springfield District Supervisor Pat Harity. Let's go to their welcome.
Hi, I'm Jeff McKay, Chairman of the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors. Welcome to the Silver Shield Task Force and AARP's virtual Scam Jam event. Every day across our county, residents are approached with phone calls, emails, doorstep solicitations, and other communications that may look like legitimate offers, but in reality are tactics to exploit our residents' sensitive and personal information. Unfortunately, scammers prey on and take advantage of our residents, particularly our elderly populations, to steal money, social security numbers, and more. Advancements in technology means these scams are now easier to carry out, more deceptive, and more pervasive than ever before. But with the right strategies and tools, you can protect yourself from fraud. Remember to be careful if someone you don't know contacts you out of the blue. If someone you've never met in person asks for money. If someone asks you to pay for something or give them money through unusual payment methods such as gift cards, wire transfers, or cryptocurrencies. If someone asks you to pay for something in advance, especially through an unusual payment method. If someone asks you for personal information, like your bank details or passwords or access to your computer. If someone pressures you into buying something or making a decision quickly, or if someone offers you something that sounds too good to be true, like an online shopping deal, a prize for winning a competition, an unclaimed inheritance, or an invitation to invest in an amazing scheme. Our annual Scam Jam event brings together top experts and law enforcement officials to discuss scams that target Virginians and empowers Fairfax County's older residents with the best tools and information to recognize scammers and protect themselves against fraud. Please know that Fairfax County is always here to help. If you face any problems with scamming, you can contact our Consumer Affairs Department and our non-emergency police line with concerns. Thank you for participating in today's important event.
Senior financial fraud and exploitation cases are increasing nationwide. In fact, a recent study by the Federal Trade Commission reported that fraud losses increased more than 70% over 2020, totaling more than $5.8 billion in losses for 2021. While our most vulnerable neighbors are certainly at greater risk, reports show that even those who are mentally aware and well-educated can fall victim to these scams. Locally, I hear horror stories every year about what my elderly constituents or their families lose to scammers. That's why in 2017, I proposed a board matter asking for help. And that's why the Silver Shield anti-scam campaign was created. Protecting our older population begins with education. Silver Shield is an all-inclusive campaign aimed at educating various groups in the community: older adults, families of seniors, neighbors, caregivers, and the general public. Since the Silver Shield initiative first launched in September 2017, the team has participated in over 200 events, which have touched about 50,000 people across the county. These events have included home and remodeling shows, community events around National Consumer Protection Week, various in-person and virtual events, and 3 successful Scam Jam events, both in-person and virtual. These educational programs are making a difference in our community, and I hope that Silver Shield will continue to offer more opportunities like this for the years to come.
As chairman of the Board of Supervisors Older Adults Committee, I take the needs of our aging residents seriously. And as many of you may know, criminal exploitation of our older residents is a problem. So much so that preventing scams and fraud is a key initiative in the Fairfax 50+ Community Action Plan. But despite all of our efforts, fraud is still a major problem. The Federal Trade Commission received fraud reports from more than 2.8 million consumers last year, with the most commonly reported category once again being imposter scams. These are scams where the criminals pretend to be a friend or loved one looking for money or help in a hurry. Of the losses reported by consumers, more than 2.3 billion reported last year were due to imposter scams. Right here in the Springfield district, our police are receiving reports of our residents getting calls from imposters pretending to be grandchildren in dire straits who need money quickly. And so far in Springfield alone, we've had 2 residents lose about $30,000 to this type of scam. Other scams commonly reported locally and across the nation include shopping scams, prize sweepstakes, lottery scams, internet service scams, and false business and job opportunities. Combined across the country, consumers reported losing more than $5.8 billion to fraud in 2021. And for our older adults who may be on fixed incomes, this loss can be even more devastating. That's why the work of the Silver Shield team is so important. Through their efforts, we can hope to get out in front of these scammers. We can educate our older adults, as well as their friends, neighbors, and loved ones, and to start a conversation so that people know what to look for, how to stop fraud in its tracks. I will hope you take what you learned today and not only put these tips into practice, but share them with others so they can be protected as well. Our best defense is to work together, and being part of today's event is the first step. Thank you so much for being here, and hope you take away some great things from today.
We thank the Fairfax County Board of Supervisors for their dedication to protecting their residents. Now joining us is Melissa Smar. Melissa is a branch chief with Fairfax County's Land Development Services, and as part of their public outreach programs, she is the coordinator of the Silver Shield Task Force. Melissa, please tell us a little bit more about Silver Shield.
Yes, Suba, good morning. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Happy Earth Day to everyone. And also we're saving gas by doing this event virtually, so thank you for that. This is also National Financial Literacy Month, and it is extremely important that you all are here today because you have the honor of hearing 3 dynamic speakers to discuss scams that are affecting our community. So the Silver Shield campaign began in 2017 with the board matter from Supervisor Gross, who you heard earlier just a few moments ago. And we have a 2-pronged approach. We assist the police, the Fairfax County Police Department, in investigating scams to try to retrieve money back for victims of scams. Sometimes that is not successful because sometimes the scammers cannot be found. And then our group also provides educational outreach, such as today's Scam Jam and other events throughout the community. We speak to senior centers, we speak to homeowners associations, senior living centers, anyone who is interested in having us come and speak about scams. Our group, we have a big group of folks that do help us throughout the year. My department, Land Development Services. I also want to thank Neighborhood and Community Services, the Department of Family Services, APS, Adult Protective Services, the Office of Public Affairs, the Office of Emergency Management and Security, the Department of Public Works and Environmental Services, who actually assist the police on scams related to tree work, Fairfax County Police Department, the Department of Cable and Consumer Services, and of course, AARP. They have been instrumental in putting this program together for the last 5 years. We are hoping to be back in person in 2023. But enjoy today, because this is going to be a great topics, financial scams to learn. And just one quick piece of fact. More younger people are actually scammed than older people, statistically, and the older people are scammed out of more money because you all have saved your entire lives to the point where you can retire. And so any money you lose, you can't gain back unless you go back and enter the workforce. So thank you for having me today, and enjoy today's program.
For those of you that are joining us via Zoom, I apologize. We are apparently having some audio problems with the Zoom link. If you are in Fairfax County, you can watch this program live on Fairfax County Cable Access Channel 16. If you are watching via Zoom, you might try enabling the closed captioning so we can see if that works. We will be sending a link to those who are joining us via Zoom after the recording, and hopefully we'll have the audio portion corrected for that portion of it. I apologize for the inconvenience, and I will turn it back to Suba. We'll try to get it corrected as quickly as we can.
Thanks, Judy. And thank you, Melissa. Our first presenter this morning is Kathy Stokes. Kathy is the Director of Fraud Prevention Programs with AARP, where she leads efforts to educate consumers on how to spot and avoid scams. Kathy has worked in and around the financial security arena for nearly 3 decades. Her experience includes serving on a special working group of the Federal Reserve to create the fraud classifier model to provide common classifications for fraud across the payments industry. She currently serves on the Advisory Council to the Board of International Association of Financial Crimes Investigators. Kathy, welcome.
Suba, thank you so much for having me. Trudy, it's great to see you. And thanks to everybody who's joined on Channel 16 and by Zoom. I'm going to talk a little bit today about AARP and our Fraud Watch Network and why we even need a Fraud Watch Network. And then I'm going to spend a little bit of time on a particular passion project that AARP has on basically a reboot on how we view fraud in this country. So let's get started. So what exactly is AARP? Because it's different things to different people. Well, on the next slide, I kind of have it laid out for you. We have 3 elements. We have the AARP Foundation, and that's where we do all of our charitable work, really great stuff happening there. We have AARP Services Incorporated, which is a for-profit, and those are the people that you can thank if you're a member of AARP for all the great benefits that come with your membership. And then in the center of that is the AARP Enterprise. That's really where our social mission work happens. It's our advocacy, it's where our state offices sit, and importantly, it's where our education and outreach sits as well. And that's where the Fraud Watch Network sits, and I can tell you a little bit about that on the next slide. So first of all, let me tell you why we need a Fraud Watch Network, and let's go to the next slide. I think the visual will help explain it. We're in the midst of a fraud frenzy, ladies and gentlemen. We have seen a massive increase in fraud losses and in fraud victimization, even in just the last couple of years. Anything from identity fraud to imposter scams, where someone's calling you and saying they're from the Social Security Administration and there's a problem with your account and you need to call back right away. Or it's the Internal Revenue Service and you owe back taxes and they're threatening you with arrest if you don't pay right away. Or it's Amazon reaching out because there's been some peculiar activity on your account and they need to help you with that. All of this has just been exponentially greater in the last couple of years as more of us we were sort of forced to be online more and at home more to answer those robocalls. So we've got a big problem on our hands, and the FraudWatch Network is there to try to address it. On to the next slide. So I want to first talk about how much fraud is out there, and the reality is we don't really know. We call it an iceberg of unseen crime at AARP, and that's because what we do know is from various sources, and one of the most popular sources is the Federal Trade Commission that has a consumer sentinel database, and all reports of fraud around the country flow into that database. However, the fraud has to be reported for it to show up in that database, and we know that fraud is severely underreported, and we'll talk a little bit about why as we move forward. And we also know that, so from the Federal Trade Commission's point of view, last year, there was just under $6 billion lost to fraud. But if you ask the FBI, they would say cybercrime has cost us 17 billion, I think. And if you look at data from a private research organization, Javelin Strategy and Research, they say there's been 56 billion lost just in identity fraud. So we don't know what we don't know, but what we do know is that there are millions of victims, there are billions in losses, and it has a profound impact on older adults. Next slide. So let's talk a little bit about that. So first I want to tell you that, criminals know no bounds. They will target anybody that they think that they can get a buck out of, right? But the reality is that older adults hold most of the wealth in the United States. 70% of the wealth in the United States is held by the baby boomers and the silent generation. So when older adults are targeted, they lose so much more money than younger people because they have more. Melissa mentioned it, we have older adults who have spent their life in the workforce and they've saved. They may have a pension from a former job. They definitely have the Social Security income, maybe housing wealth, and scammers know that. And when an older person is a fraud victim and they lose, a monumental amount of money to them, there's little chance of restitution, and they can't go back into the workforce typically to try to earn that money back. So as I said, it has a profound impact on older adults, and that's why it is so important to AARP that we're out there and educating people to help them understand how to spot and avoid fraud. Next slide, please. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about our FraudWatch network. If we can go to the next slide. It's like sort of 3 parts, let's say. There's the education component, and that's where we're doing things like here on Fairfax 16 today, trying to get out in front of audiences to help them understand how to spot and avoid fraud. We do webinars and teletown halls. We have 53 state offices, just like we have one in AARP in Virginia, and they're out in community when they can be and virtually when they can't, and it's all to get the message of fraud prevention out there. We have a hit podcast, which I'll talk about in a little bit. We have also, on the other side of things, if you've fallen victim, we have a FraudWatch Network helpline, which I'll talk about more in a minute. And we also do advocacy, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But the FraudWatch Network helpline is an absolute gem, and I want to make sure you guys all understand that this is available to anybody. You do not have to be an AARP member. You do not have to be of a certain age to call this number and get help when you need it. So it's free to everybody. You can call and report a scam. That data go right into that Federal Trade Commission Consumer Sentinel that I spoke about. you can call to get help figuring out whether or not something is legitimate or not. Like say you get a mailing that says it's Publishers Clearinghouse and you won $1 million in a car. If you're not sure if that's legitimate, call the helpline and they can walk you through what to look for. And importantly, if you've lost money or sensitive information to a fraudulent act or someone in your family is experiencing it, you can call, and we have trained fraud specialists. There are volunteers, and they will, most importantly, listen with an empathetic ear. They will help you try to figure out what happened. They'll help you on figuring out where to report it and what to do if in the event there's a possibility for restitution. And the average time last year per call was 22 minutes. So that's the average. Think about how many more that have been, hour and a half, even longer than that, because these people really care. And it's a judgment-free zone. And just last year alone, we took in 97,000 calls. That number is 877-908-3360. I hope you all write that down, 877-908-3360. So I want to talk a little bit about a new program we have. We piloted it and it ended up really working out well for the people that engaged in it. It's called REST, which stands for Resilience, Strength, and Time. We partnered with the Volunteers of America, and it's creating an online program where victims and their families can convene with a trained facilitator, a peer facilitator, and spend an hour trying to get through the emotional impact of being a victim of fraud. A lot of people understand that the losses financially are profound, but just as profound is the emotional impact. And so the REST program was actually built off of a program that Volunteers of America had created some years ago for military returning from the war theater and trying to integrate the experience they had so that they can sort of move on with their lives. And so we have people come in, we have 1 hour sessions on Zoom, and we're still working to get more people to know about it. So it's small but mighty. And the people that have experienced it tell us what an impact it's had. For example, I feel like a weight has been lifted off my shoulders. Thank you for listening. They know that they're not alone, and we're trying to reduce that sense of shame and empower people to report and to not be embarrassed that it happened, because it happens and it happens to everybody. And I mentioned before, we have a hit podcast called The Perfect Scam. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts. Next Friday is the last episode of season 11, so we've been around a while. It's won several awards. We basically look at fraud stories mostly from the perspective of the victim and what has happened to them, experts, whether in law enforcement or fraud investigations. And it's part education and part entertainment. And if you haven't listened before, I highly recommend it. We'll be back in about a month with season 12. And I also was asked to talk a little bit about our Fraud Watch Speakers Bureau. We created this back in about 2019. I think Tom Manganello, who you're going to be hearing from later, and Christine Kieffer are speakers on that. We have the marquee speakers who include a retired assistant district attorney from San Diego, Paul Greenwood, who has spent his entire career before he retired prosecuting elder fraud cases. And he's here to tell us that they're prosecutable and they're winnable. We have Brett Johnson, who was once on the FBI's Most Wanted for the crimes that he committed on the dark web. He has reformed, and he helps people understand with AARP and other organizations how the fraud works and how you can avoid it. And then we have this wonderful woman named Kate Fleiner, who I think she was about 64, 65, when she experienced an online romance fraud that happened over the course of just under a year. And through it, she lost everything she had, $40,000. And instead of hiding and feeling shamed, she wants to get out there and she wants to tell other people how it happened so that they can understand the impact and to get out there and help people understand how to avoid this. And then we have experts within AARP, myself. I have a colleague, Amy Knopstiger. She runs all of our victim support programming. We have a state director in Washington who has spent his life working in this space and researching. And then we have a whole host of people from the federal government agencies that we work with who are out with us in community. And then, of course, our state offices have great relationships with their local and state folks as well. And I mentioned we do advocacy. It's focused on prevention, intervention, and recovery. You know, we are on a mission to seek to strengthen consumer protections, push for change in how the criminal justice system responds to fraud. We want to work with industry and with the government on changes to allow interventions when fraud is suspected and somebody can intervene and try to stop the fraud from happening. And then recovery, Melissa mentioned it, I'll mention it again. You know, it's very unusual to be able to recover lost assets when you lose them to fraud. And we're working at the state and federal level to come up with ways to provide financial recovery to fraud victims. And now we come to a discussion on where we are really putting a lot of energy. We're looking at doing nothing short of changing the way our country thinks about fraud victims and thinks about fraud as a crime. If we can go on to the next slide. So in, this should say violent, but in violent and property crimes, you know, I mean, they tug at our heartstrings. They're horrible, and we really feel for the people who experience them. Oh, that poor family. There's a burglary, and they're just devastated by that. Or there's a violent crime. I'll bake them a lasagna. We care. We want to help them. But when we look at fraud victims, what do we say? We say, you got duped by that. That's the oldest trick in the book. Or you'd have to be an idiot. Or how much money did you give them? How could you fall for that? It's these words that, whether we intend to or not, we're blaming them instead of the criminal for what they've experienced. And then how do victims think about themselves? You know, I can't believe I fell for this. How could I be so stupid? They're putting that blame all on themselves. And we don't know, it's a chicken or egg, right? Is it because society blames them that they blame themselves, or is it because they blame themselves so we blame them? Who really knows? It doesn't matter. The fact is, it's what we do, and it's how financial crimes victims feel about themselves, and they should. So we do a lot of online discussions, chats in the fraud space, and here are just a few verbatims of people who are responding to an article about someone who was a victim of a financial crime. I cannot fathom the level of gullibility it would take for someone to send money to someone they never met. Or, good God, where has common sense gone? I know people are lonely. Hell, I'm lonely, but I'm not stupid. This is what we have to put up with. All of this allows us to have this illusion of invincibility, because it won't happen to me because I'm smart, I'm on my guard, they would never fool me, and so we can go on believing that it only happens to other people. Let me tell you a little bit about today's scammer. You know, a lot of people have this, this notion that there's a guy in his mom or his grandma's basement making one phone call after the other, or lurking on internet sites looking for their next victim. And sure, those people exist. But what we're really dealing with these days is organized crime, often transnational organized crime. These folks have offices in big buildings. They have employees who earn money based on how many people they can steal money from. They buy lead lists from each other. They have money, they have time, and they have a playbook. Let's talk a little bit about that playbook. One thing these criminals have known since the beginning of time is that if you can get your target into a heightened emotional state, what they refer to as getting them under the ether, then you as the victim, once you're in that state, whether it's fear or excitement, or somebody builds this sense where you're actually in love with somebody through a romance scam, you can't easily access logical thinking, and they know that. So they try to get us up into that heightened emotional state. Ladies and gentlemen, who has not been in a heightened emotional state over the course of the last couple of years at some point in time? So for many of us, we're already there, and all they have to do is push us a little bit more, and they can convince us to pretty much do anything. So what's the toll of financial crime in this country? We have billions of dollars lost with little chance of restitution. We have data from the Finra Education Foundation that says 2 in 3 victims report experiencing at least one serious health or emotional impact because of the fraud they experienced, and sadly, thousands die by suicide. But what if we said, falling victim is not your fault? It's the fault of the criminal who perpetrated the crime, and I'm sorry you've had to endure this. Words matter. Instead of saying, I can't believe you got duped, try saying, it's not your fault. Instead of saying, how could you fall for that? Try saying, scammers are really good at what they do, and you're a victim of a crime. One side implies blame and inspires shame, and the other shows empathy. And it empowers that victim. Maybe that victim won't be embarrassed, and they'll make that call to the police and report it. And I submit this is really not just a word game. It's beyond semantics. We believe that if we change the way we think and feel about financial crimes, that the victims will report the crime more instead of being ashamed and embarrassed. They'll get angry and they'll want to do something about it. We think that family relationships will be protected because so often, and we hear this on our helpline, this can tear families apart. If an older adult child sees a mom repeatedly falling victim to the same online romance scam and all the money's going away and she can't get through to mom, it's frustrating, and it tears the family apart. And if we can see that it's not that person's fault, then we believe that families will be protected. We believe that a lot of police and sheriffs today, when they get that call from a victim that says they've experienced a fraud, too many of them believe it's only a civil matter, and they tell them they won't even take a report. We need the police to understand that this indeed is a criminal matter and that they should take the report, even investigate. And then we can convince prosecutors that this is really a serious problem. They would take on more cases. They would understand that these are actually really good cases to get in front of a jury. And maybe policymakers would act to address this multi-billion-dollar fraud industry. So I'll end this by saying, be the change. Use words that acknowledge the crime and the sophistication of the criminal. Respond to victims with empathy and concern. Whether you mean it or not, if you say, yeah, you got duped, it's hurting. That puts a sword through that person's heart because it's not their fault. And report the crime. And anytime you experience somebody in your life that has experienced this, make sure that they report it. And if you're on LinkedIn, I quite often go off on tangents about this, and I try to use a hashtag, not the victim's fault. So I would invite you to join me. Thank you.
Kathy, thank you for a very informative presentation. Let's see if we have any questions from our audience.
Yes, Kathy, we do have a couple of questions. The first one is, does the AARP Fraud Watch Network open and monitor cases for inbound calls that are deemed to be legitimate?
I think they're asking, when we receive the phone calls from victims, what do we do with them?
Yes.
And we're not investigators or police, but we refer people to the authorities that they need to report to. And we've worked with law enforcement and even private industry to help them understand what's happening out there. And we have helped with law enforcement in building cases.
Very good. Where does one access the Perfect Scam podcast?
Anywhere you listen to podcasts. I listen to mine on the Apple app on my phone. You can even go online to aarp.org/theperfectscam. You can listen to it there, or you can follow the instructions on how to download it. But anywhere you listen to podcasts, there, just type in the search, The Perfect Scam.
Okay. Another individual has asked, they've received several phone calls that appear to be from national police or firefighter organizations. How do they know if these are real charities, or do they just sound legitimate because they represent a national group?
You know, I'm not here to say that any of those calls are bogus, but I think a lot of them are. And, you know, I think anytime you're approached to give money to a cause, don't just commit immediately because it sounds like a good cause. You do your research. There are a variety of resources on the web, a charity navigator, give.org, and you can find out if these are registered charities, even with your state. But even more than that, if they're registered charities, they can still be scammers in the sense that most of the money that they raise goes to them and not to the cause. So do your research. If it's a legitimate organization and you say, I need to do my research, they'll wait for you. But what I suggest to people is, you know, make a list. At the end of every year, I look into the next year and decide what organization I'm going to support with my charitable donations. I make a list and I stick to it. And if I get that call and it's kind of pulling at my heartstrings, I'll just say, you know what, I've already made my commitments, but thank you.
Another one of our guests has asked, they've been searching for a loan online, but is concerned about scams. Do you have any advice?
I wouldn't look for a loan online. I know that there are a lot of resources online and probably many legitimate ones. I just think it's fraught with problems. If you're having financial issues, you can work with the nonprofit national, what is going to be called? Someone's going to remember it for me. It's a consumer counseling nonprofit, and they can connect you with financial advisors who will charge you nothing or very little to get your house in order. But the internet's a lot of great things happen on the internet, and a lot of really bad things happen too. So I wouldn't trust it.
Okay. Kathy, one of our guests is very interested in the victim support group, the VOA REST program. Could you repeat how to get to that group online? And do you think VOA REST and or AARP will be able to offer that service in person, in an in-person support group? I'm going to say when it's safe to do things in person again.
Yeah, so we're back in our office, but we're not back out in community yet, except for some shred events. So that remains to be seen. But the webpage is aarp.org/fraud support. And if you're not online, you can call 1-877-908-3360. That's our Fraud Watch Network helpline, and they can direct you, or they can, I believe they can sign you up.
One more question. How does one report email and text scams? Where would they report email and text scams to?
Really, any scam can be reported through our helpline or through the Federal Trade Commission, which is reportfraud.ftc.gov. And we also have a scam tracking map at aarp.org/scam map. Any of these ways, the data go into the bucket of what's happening out there. And it is important to report if you have the time, even if you haven't experienced a loss. The data do help law enforcement investigators put pieces together of the crime. So I appreciate anyone who asked that, because it's important to report.
Very good. Another guest has asked, they recently tried to purchase something online on the internet, but they wouldn't accept a credit or a debit card. They wanted them to download another app for a form of payment. Is that safe?
In a word, in my book, no. I think anytime you're purchasing online anyway, the safest bet is to use your credit card, because that's where there are the most consumer protections. I know that there are businesses out there who only accept now through like Cash App or Venmo or, one of these cash apps. You don't have the same protections. So I'd use the credit card. And if that's a vendor and you really want that product, go find that product somewhere else where they're legitimately going to allow you to use your credit card.
Very good. It looks like that's the last question that I have. I will acknowledge there's a question in the Q&A box, but it refers specifically to Fairfax County Police and their financial crimes unit. I don't think we have the expertise here today to answer that question, but I will make an attempt if I can get contact information through the Zoom. I'll make an attempt to answer that question personally and directly for you if I can. And that is all the questions that we have at this time. More information is always available at our AARP Fraud Watch Network website. Thank you again, Kathy, for joining us today. I always appreciate your expertise.
Thanks
Suba?
for having me.
Our next speaker is Tom Manganello, Senior Counsel in the Securities and Exchange Commission's Office of Investor Education and Advocacy. In that role, Tom researches and drafts investor alerts and bulletins for the SEC's website. He regularly contributes to the SEC's social media outreach on Twitter and Facebook. Welcome, Tom.
Suba, Trudy, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure today to be speaking to residents of Fairfax County and the city of Fairfax, of which I am one. The timing of this conversation is just perfect because April happens to be Financial Capability Month. And here's a fun fact. We used to call this Financial Literacy Month. Literacy is hugely important. Knowledge is power. The more you know about a scam, the less likely you are to fall for one. But a few years back, we decided that we needed to couple knowledge with action. And so today we're not only going to talk about scams, we're going to talk about the things we need to know to avoid them, but we're also going to talk about specific action steps that people can take in order to protect their nest egg and avoid scams. So identifying and avoiding investment scams today. Of course, I work for the federal government, and so I have to give this disclaimer. The views that I express today are my own, not necessarily the views of the Securities and Exchange Commission or our commissioners or my fellow staff. And of course, I'm not giving legal advice today or even investment advice, but we are going to talk about some tenets of sound investing and avoiding scams. Now, I work for the SEC. We have a tripartite, three-part mission. We want to maintain orderly markets. We want to facilitate capital formation so that when someone has a great idea, they can bring it to the market. When someone has a good product or a service, they can get the money that they need to scale it. And while we do those two things, we want to make sure we are protecting investors. And one of the ways we protect investors is through education, like we have today. Everything I'm going to speak about today is covered in more detail on the SEC's website for Main Street investors. That is investor.gov. It is a really great one-stop shop of tools and resources that you can use to be a more informed investor and to avoid scams. On this slide, I just showed an arrow next to the button on the landing page that goes to our Protect Your Investments screen, which will tell you many ways that you can protect your nest egg. Everything from doing a background check if you plan to be using an investment professional, to our tools and calculators like our required minimum distribution tool, our compound interest calculator, and to our many, many investor alerts and bulletins that can clue you into scams that our enforcement division is seeing at the SEC. Now, I think Kathy attempted to quantify how much fraud there actually is out there. I think she said that there's a fraud frenzy and that all we can see is sort of the tip of the iceberg of the unseen crime out there. I'm not going to do any better at quantifying this. Needless to say, it's a lot. Our friends at Finra, and you're going to hear from Christine in a few minutes here, have estimated that 80% of us have been approached with some sort of financial fraud or some sort of scam. And a good percentage of us actually invest in whatever that offer is. And some of us even lose money to that offer. And so it's critically important that we educate ourselves and that we take some action steps to prevent falling victim to a fraud. And so let's first talk about how we identify that something is a scam in the first place. One of the biggest red flags of a scam is when something simply sounds too good to be true. You really want to listen and hearken back to your mother's advice. If it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Trust your instincts. If somebody is pressuring you to buy something right now, urgently, I need to hear from you by 5 p.m., or this offer is off the table, or I only have a few units left. That is also a classic warning sign of fraud, because no legitimate investment requires you to make a rash decision. Don't fall for that. If you don't see documentation, there is no prospectus, there is nothing in writing, you cannot see audited financials, well then of course you want to walk away from those types of offers. Because so many legitimate investments do have those things. They do have a way to be opaque and transparent, and for you to do your research and due diligence. And then this one is absolutely critical. If you're going to invest, make sure you're dealing with a licensed and registered person who is either a broker who can buy and sell securities, or is an investment advisor, somebody who can provide investment advice. Such a large percentage of the scams that we see at the SEC that target retail investors are committed by folks who are not licensed or not registered. So if you could just take that one step, you can cut out a big chunk of the market, the scam market. Now, another big red flag is unsolicited offers. These are offers that are that come out of the blue, that you didn't seek out. When somebody comes to you through a cold call from a boiler room, or from an email, or from a spam social media post, or those radio shows in the middle of the night, or those newsletters that come to your mailbox, these are examples of unsolicited offers. In other words, you didn't go seeking this investment. The investment sort of came to you in a very individual and efforted way. Here's how you respond. You don't respond, okay? If it's a call, you don't recognize the number, don't pick up. If it's a spam email, don't click on it. If there's a link, don't click on it. If it's a radio advice, keep in mind that this person is probably being paid to give that advice, or they're pushing products that pay them a big commission, these sorts of things. You want to be very careful with unsolicited offers, those offers that you didn't seek out, because there's much more fraud in that space. Now, I wanted to talk a little bit today about one of the more recently popular investments, which are crypto assets, because we get so many questions in this space. What am I talking about when I talk about crypto assets? These are those digital tokens, that such as non-fungible tokens or cryptocurrencies that claim to be an alternative to fiat, traditional currency. These are not tokens we reach into our wallet or to our purse to retrieve, right? These are all created and stored in sort of a digital format. The transactions in these crypto assets are affected using what they call the blockchain, or this distributed ledger. It's a series of servers around the world that track each one of these transactions. And of course, it's supposed to be so complex that it's difficult or impossible to counterfeit or to duplicate. Now, when you hear people promoting these types of investments, often they'll say the best thing about them is that they're decentralized. You know, they're not affiliated with your bank, and they're not regulated by the government. But what I'd like to talk to you today is that presents some risks that you should know about. Or perhaps it's not you, perhaps it's a family member who's considering investments in crypto assets. Well, here's one of the risks. These are relatively novel investments. Crypto assets have not been around very long. Even the grandfather of cryptocurrencies, which is Bitcoin, has only been around for about a dozen years. These are also speculative investments. What do I mean by that? I mean that you could lose a lot of money if you're investing in crypto assets. I also mean that crypto assets tend to not have intrinsic value. In other words, to distinguish them from a share of stock, which may pay you dividends, or which gives you ownership in a tiny sliver of that company's profits, its revenues. It's, for example, a share of Amazon stock gives you a tiny sliver of ownership in warehouses, in trucks, in a software program that matches people with products, in the revenue that that company earns each month, each week, each year. Very different with crypto assets, where there is no true intrinsic value. It's speculative in that the only way you make money with a crypto asset is if you buy it at a lower amount and you sell it at a higher amount. Also, keep in mind the regulatory posture that seems so popular right now is something that could change, right? And the winds of change do seem to be blowing. It looks like not only the US government, but governments around the world are considering implementing tighter regulations in this space. And needless to say, you're going to get fewer investor protections with investments in crypto assets than you get with traditional investments like stocks, like bonds, like your 401k or mutual funds. Now, there are some other risks to consider. For example, these are very volatile assets. The value of a crypto asset can go up or down 20% in a day sometimes. And that can sometimes be because there's bad information out there that can manipulate the price, that can move the price of these assets. Not a lot of transparency or accountability or governance issues with crypto assets. There are many bad actors in this space. For example, drug lords may launder money using cryptocurrency. Terrorists may deal with their financing through cryptocurrency. Why? Because it's completely anonymous. Even more recently, we see that Russian oligarchs who have had their yachts seized and who have had their Manhattan condominiums seized have moved much of their wealth into cryptocurrencies. Why? Because it's anonymous and very difficult to trace and retrieve. There have been hacks. There have been cybersecurity issues with certain coins and certain crypto assets. And of course, it's important to note that if you're buying crypto assets because you want to use them as currency, very few banks, very few vendors are going to accept these as payment. And so what is, we have seen straight up scams in this space too. I have a slide here showing a recent action that the SEC has brought, the SEC versus BitConnect. This is a case where we have alleged that the defendants were lending or inducing investors to lend their Bitcoin to them, billions of dollars worth of this Bitcoin. They were promising very high profits. They said the profits would be generated by a computer bot or some sort of program. But behind the scenes, what they were doing was secretly paying promoters to provide testimonials on YouTube. They were paying people to say, hey, I've made a lot of money with this. They were also rewarding investors for recruiting new victims. So there was a little bit of a pyramid scheme aspect to this particular case we have alleged. And they were actually using new revenue that was coming in from newer investors to pay those promised returns to older investors. So a bit of a Ponzi scheme element as well. And so what are some of the red flags? If we can go back one slide, what are some of the red flags of some of these crypto scams? Well, first thing, they will oftentimes promise high guaranteed returns. That's also a red flag of classic investment frauds. They're mostly, and if not all, unlicensed and unregistered sellers. Remember, this is a big red flag we want to keep in mind. Anytime we're going to use an investment professional, we want to make sure they're licensed and registered. We'll tell you in a minute how to do that. They sometimes advertise or show their phone to show you their skyrocketing account values, right? This is something that's really easy to fake. Everything sounds too good to be true. And of course, the testimonials or the celebrity endorsements, those are easy to fake, but they're also easy to simply pay for. Just because a celebrity has endorsed a product doesn't mean you're going to make money with it. Now, the celebrity will. They've probably been compensated, but you may not. So be very careful with that. Takeaway. Hey, you can lose some or all of your money if you're considering investing in risky assets like crypto assets. And so what we want you to do, what we want your relatives who may be considering this to do, is really consider how much of your overall portfolio, if any, that you want to devote to those types of assets. Okay, I thought I'd talk a little bit about some of the common investment scams because, again, knowledge is power. And if you know how these scams look, you're going to be less likely to fall for one. The first one I'd like to talk about takes place in the microcap space. Have you heard of penny stocks? Those really inexpensive stocks, maybe 10 cents, 50 cents, $1 a share. They trade on the over-the-counter markets. Well, one of the because of the lack of liquidity and the fact that some of these publicly traded shell companies sit dormant for long periods of time, is they can lend themselves to a scam called a pump and dump. And a pump and dump is where promoters acquire a bunch of shares of some very cheap, very thinly traded stock, and they begin to advertise it. And they're smart promoters, right? They're going to choose advertising buzzwords that play off very popular themes or themes that are in the news at this particular time. So like for today, they might advertise that they have a product that they have a cryptocurrency exchange or they're somehow affiliated with a crypto coin that will make a lot of money. Or maybe they have a cannabis operation that is poised to make money in a state that is legalized cannabis. Or, a few months ago, maybe they would say they had a cure for COVID-19 or an accurate test for COVID. What they do in making these advertisements is they induce people to start to buy the stock. So as they're pumping the stock price with all these promotions, the stock price goes up and the promoters, sell their shares. And those of us who are legitimate investors are left holding shares of what is essentially a worthless company. So be very careful if you're investing in the microcap stock space. A lot of scams. We have a lot of great information on investor.gov about microcaps, so check that out. Another type of scam is the traditional Ponzi scheme. You may have remembered about 100 years ago, there was this man named Charles Ponzi who was selling stamps with international coupons. And he was promising people huge returns, something like 50% returns in 30 days or 100% returns in 90 days. And what he was actually doing was taking the money from new investors that just came in, and he was paying those older investors those really exorbitant and promised guaranteed returns that he made earlier. And so be really careful if you hear an offer of very high returns with little or no risk. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense because remember, in investing, the potential for higher return typically comes with higher risk. And so when you see these guarantees of high return or pitches that have little or no risk, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Another hallmark of Ponzi schemes is that they always have these secretive or complex strategies. Watch out for that because remember, investments aren't meant to be complicated. And if you can't understand what somebody is pitching, that may be intentional. They may be doing that because they're hoping you won't ask questions and you'll think they're very sophisticated and more likely to invest with them. And of course, the tried and true unregistered sellers. Frequently, Ponzi schemes are implemented by folks who don't have a registered license to be a broker, dealer, or an investment advisor. Now, another common scheme is a pyramid scheme, right? You may have heard of multi-level marketing, and sometimes some of those multi-level marketing companies spend much more time on recruitment of people than they do on actual selling of a product. That's a big red flag and a concern that a company may be a pyramid scheme. They also promise great lifestyles, easy money, passive income, right? You can just sit at home and eat bonbons and you'll make $6,000 a week, right? You get two friends, they get two friends, they get two friends, and before you know it, you're on easy street. Well, of course, I'm not aware of any easy way to make money. I'm not aware of any overnight scheme that can make you rich. And so be very careful if somebody is pushing a product that is much more interested in recruitment of people and not even interested at all in the selling of a solid, good product. Now, another phenomenon you may see is these investment newsletters. They can come in the mail. Sometimes they're unsolicited. Some of these are legitimate. I don't want to imply that they're all fraudulent. Keep in mind that if you're promoting a particular stock and you're being paid to do so, you need to reveal that. And the problem is with some of these newsletters, the notice that reveals this promotional payment made is in small print, but the hot stock picks is in larger print. So be careful. Use promotions of particular stock picks with a grain of salt, and make sure you understand if that person is being paid to do the promotion. Then there's this species of fraud we call affinity fraud. This is fraud where you have a reason to trust someone. You know, maybe they served in the military with you. Maybe you work with them. Maybe they go to your church. Maybe they live in your neighborhood. It turns out when we trust someone, we're more likely to let our guard down, and we're more likely to make an investment with that person. And so what we want to say here is we want to trust but verify, right? Even if it is someone who goes to your church, or someone who advertises in the bulletin, or someone who plays in your golf league, take the step to make sure they are licensed and registered if you're tempted to use them, or if you're tempted to make an investment with that person. Remember, sometimes our friends or our trusted inner circle may be very genuine in what they're promoting. They may not know that what they're promoting is a scam or is a pyramid scheme. And so it's you who have to take these steps to protect yourself and protect your nest egg. Okay, now that was knowledge. We now know about some of these scams. Let's talk about some of the action steps that we can take that can protect our money, our hard-earned money. One of the first is, if you're going to use an investment professional, please get on investor.gov and make sure they're licensed and registered. This is how investor.gov looks on your phone. This is the landing page. And you can see right there in the center of the landing page, you can put in the name of a person or a firm. You will make sure they're licensed and registered. And believe me, you can do this about as fast as you can do a Yelp review of the nearest restaurant. Find out if they're licensed and registered. You'll also be able to see their employment history. You can see if this is someone who has bounced from firm to firm. You can see important disclosures, like have they had customer complaints? Have they had disciplinary actions? This is important to note, and it may be important for you before you invest your life savings with that person. Now, a second step that you can take is to do your own diligence. Kick the tires. Make sure you understand an investment before you get involved with it. And you really want to seek out sources that are unbiased, that are revenue neutral, right? Because they're not trying to sell you anything. Just one of these unbiased sources is our EDGAR system that we have at the SEC. EDGAR means Electronic Database Gathering and Retrieval, long acronym. But what it really lets you do is you can research publicly traded companies, right? There's more than 7,000 of these. You can see who are the officers and directors. What are the risks that the officers think they're facing with the company? Well, how do the audited financials of this company look? What are the monthly or what are the quarterly and the annual reports saying that this company is filing, or those material reports that the company files on a regular basis? And there's a great tutorial on EDGAR that will allow you to research products. And of course, there's so many other unbiased, product neutral sites. Like if you're investigating fees of investments, perhaps Christine Kieffer will tell you about Finra's great site, which is the Fund Analyzer, which will allow you to do an apples to apples comparison of what it will cost you to hold various investments. So check out unbiased, neutral resources. There are those at your library as well. If you're a member of the Fairfax County Public Library, you probably can get access to Morningstar, to Value Line, and to dozens of other investment research resources. Now, what else can you do? Well, of course, if you get a call from the government claiming you owe money, don't accept it at face value, because typically government agencies aren't going to call or email people demanding money, as Kathy alluded to earlier. What you really want to do is you want to go straight to the agency itself. So if it's the IRS, go to irs.gov, to the website. Look up their 800 number and call them, right? Say, hey, I just received a demand for back taxes from the IRS in X amount. I just want to make sure this is legitimate. Chances are it's bogus. This has been a very popular and common scam. Don't pick up the phone if you don't know who's calling. Of course, if you do pick up the phone and start speaking to somebody, don't reveal important, personally identifiable information. You know, don't tell them your mother's maiden name, your passwords, your brokerage account number, your social security number, any of that stuff. Remember, if you pick up the phone and it's a scam or a spam caller, you're going to be added to a list of people who pick up the phone. If you pick up the phone and start talking to someone, you're going to be added to a list of people who pick up the phone and start talking to people. If you pick up, talk, and then invest or send money somewhere, you're going to be on a victims list that's going to be sold on the dark web, and you're going to get so many solicitations, it'll be overwhelming. So again, don't deal with unknown salespeople. And remember, there's no lottery in the world that requires you to pay the taxes before you receive your winnings. And so if you're faced with a promotion, a contest, an investment where you have to make an upfront payment, that is a hallmark of a scam. It also turns out that the way you're instructed to pay for an investment may be an indication that it's a scam. All right, scammers love it when they direct you to pay with these untraceable, irreversible payment methods, okay? Telling you to pay in cryptocurrency, pay with gift cards, pay by wiring money overseas. These are ways you send money that you can never retrieve. Be very careful when someone is telling you to pay for something with those means. If you're using payment apps like Venmo, be careful there too. You really only want to use those with sources that you know, people you know, or trusted vendors. And remember, when you're making investment, legitimate brokers are not going to allow you to buy securities with a credit card. So if somebody's directing you to pay for investments with a credit card, be very careful. There's not only a fraud risk, but of course, by the time your credit card bill comes in, that investment may have dropped in value. You may be paying for something that's already worth much less. Not a good practice. Okay, next slide. Another way you can really protect yourself is by naming a trusted contact to your brokerage account. It could be the case that your brokerage can't get a hold of you, or they may have seen you and wondered if you were having a health crisis or had a cognitive issue. Really important to name a trusted contact, because that person can reach out, find out if you're okay. They can identify you. If you actually have somebody who is separately your power of attorney, they can reach out to them as well. So this is something, all new accounts are prompted to do this. And if you've had an existing brokerage account, you should have been asked to do this in the past year or two. But if you haven't done so, touch base with your broker, because this is a good step that you can take. And of course, just secure your online accounts, including your investment accounts. What can you do? Of course, pick a strong password. Keep that secure. You change it on a regular basis. Right now, we really have the benefit of this two-step verification with a lot of our accounts. And that's great, because you put in your user ID, you put in your password, and then perhaps they will send you a code by text or something, and then you type that in. And so that's that extra level. Even if someone guesses your ID or your password, they're not going to be able to get in access to your accounts. This is extremely difficult and extremely annoying, but use different passwords for different online accounts. I know we have so much to remember these days, but it really does make a difference in protecting your accounts. All right. I want to close today by reminding you what some of the resources are that you can take advantage of when you're focused on investing and when you want to bone up on how to avoid scams. Of course, our website is investor.gov. Investor.gov looks like this. We'll go to the next slide. This is the landing page. A lot of great information on here. Again, right in the center, you can check out any investment professional if you're using one. If you have folks in your life that are new to investing, you see our introduction to investing on the top and those financial tools and calculators. Everything you want to know about digital assets is down in that red 6-pack. And you can sign up for our investor alerts and bulletins. We have thousands of these. We'll go to the next slide. These are just a few of the alerts that we've done in the past couple of years. Information on crypto investment scams, tips to protect your account from phishing and those types of intrusions. Social isolation and the risk of investment fraud. You know, it really turns out we make worse decisions when we're socially isolated. And this became a big concern during the COVID quarantine, right? Where we weren't talking to as many people. And it turns out that not only older Americans, but all Americans, when we don't have anyone to bounce ideas off of, we only have our own perspective. And we always benefit from more than one perspective. And so the more socially isolated we are, the more vulnerable we are to frauds. And just a few other investor alerts there. And of course, if you have questions about your investments or your investment professional, the Securities and Exchange Commission has a staff of investor assistance folks who man this phone number, 800-732-0330, and this email box, help@sec.gov. You can send those questions to us. I think we got more than 20,000 of those inquiries last year. We have a team that can help you. And of course, if you're on Facebook, if you're on Twitter, we would love it if you would like us and follow us. We have some really important information that we try to impart through those two social media channels, and it can help make you a more informed investor and less likely to fall victim to a scam. And finally, if there's ever an audience, a school, a library, by the way, I'll be speaking to the Fairfax County Libraries system next week, April 26th at 12 p.m. on investing in the digital age. Hope you can check your local library for how to view that program. But if there is an audience that could benefit from this type of conversation, please send me an email at outreach@sec.gov. I check that email box every day, and we try to say yes to all of those requests. And so with that, I will throw it back to Suba and Trudy in the studio.
Thank you, Tom. Let's see if we have any questions for Tom from our audience. Trudy.
Tom, I do have a couple of questions for you. The first one came in saying, what about the Wall Street scamming people legally? Can you talk a little bit about that? This particular individual has put something in the Zoom chat box about a book that she found particularly interesting. But let's talk about Wall Street.
Yeah, so just because someone is licensed and registered, of course, is no guarantee that they're not unethical or bad or even a criminal. And of course, at the Securities and Exchange Commission, we have a robust enforcement division. I spent my first 10 years of my career in the enforcement division, enforcing violations of the federal securities laws, doing investigations. I think last year, the enforcement division brought almost 800 enforcement actions. We recovered almost $4 billion for harmed investors and in recoveries that were disgorgement or penalties. And so, yes, we are ever vigilant. We have a trading and markets group that tries to make sure that the markets themselves are fair and orderly. I'm not sure what specific violation that the caller was asking about, but we do our best, and we try to catch the bad actors, get them out of the industry, and make sure that the system itself, the markets, are fair.
Has COVID and the pandemic expanded the job that you have to do? I think they're anticipating that there may be some violations coming down with regard to people not providing the correct personal protection gear and things like that. Is that something the SEC would be involved in?
Well, fraud never sleeps, and certainly COVID and the quarantine period presented some new opportunities for investment scammers. We saw, for example, several pump and dumps where the companies were luring new investors to these penny stocks by saying they had cures for COVID-19 or by saying they had testing equipment, that sort of thing. And our agency was able to suspend trading in dozens of companies that were abusing investors in that respect. But beyond that, we continued our operations. We continue to this day. We're not in our building yet, but most of us are on a telework posture, but we are working hard, again, on our three-part mission, and hopefully we're doing a reasonable job.
Great. Does the SEC have field offices in states across the country?
Yeah, we not only have our Washington, D.C. headquarters, but we have 11 regional offices around the country from coast to coast. And you can see all those regional offices on our agency website, sec.gov.
Thank you. Can we go back and talk about EDGAR? Can you give us what that acronym stands for again? And the question is, where does one find EDGAR?
So, yeah, EDGAR is electronic database gathering and retrieval. It is a way to research publicly traded companies. There are 7,000 of them in our country today. You find that by just Googling the word EDGAR. It'll be the first one that comes up. But you can also access EDGAR on investor.gov and on sec.gov. And EDGAR has recently been upgraded and improved to the point where you can just type in the name of a company and go straight to the relevant filings, the filings you want to see, whether it's the annual 10K or whether it's the quarterly 10Qs or whether it's those 8Ks that people like to look at to see what the most material events have been that investors might be interested in. And there's a tutorial that can walk you through how to use EDGAR to research companies. I always recommend people do that first.
Thank you. When the SEC prosecutes an individual or a company, does that money ever filter its way back to the consumer that may have been involved?
It certainly does. And we don't prosecute in that our actions are not criminal. Our actions are civil. We can seek disgorgement of the damages, in other words, the money that they took as a result of the fraud. We can seek penalties on top of that disgorgement, which is money in addition to what they recovered from harmed investors. And we frequently are able to return that money to harmed investors through what are called fair funds. Our enforcement division can set up a fair fund that redistributes, returns the money to those harmed investors.
Very good. That appears to be all the questions that I have for you, Tom. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you again, Tom. We will now have a 10-minute stretch break and returning to fighting fraud smart tips for investors with our next speaker. Welcome back to Scam Jam Fairfax 2022. Our next presenter is Christine Kieffer. Christine is Senior Director of the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority and their Investor Education Foundation, for which she directs research and develops programs for law enforcement, victim advocates, and consumers to advance investor protection and fraud prevention initiatives. She also serves on advisory boards to the National Adult Protective Services and the Cybercrime Support Network. Welcome, Christine.
Well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here in my home county of Fairfax County. So thank you for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the psychology of a scam. And our previous presenters, Kathy Stokes and Tom Manganello, talked a lot about the different types of scams that are out there. And I'm going to bring you behind the scenes and take a look at the cons playbook. But before I do that, I just want to introduce you to Finra. Finra is the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, and Suba mentioned that. And Finra regulates all stockbrokers and brokerage firms in the country. So we operate under the Securities and Exchange Commission's oversight, and you just heard from Tom Manganello, but we're not part of the government. It's our job to make sure that the brokers and the brokerage firms are following the securities laws and treating their investors with dignity, respect, and protecting their investors as well. And with that, I'm going to talk about the power of persuasion. So Kathy mentioned earlier, next slide, that the role of the con artist is to put you into the ether. What does that mean? How do they do that? When you think about ether, there's the old historical context of ether, and then there's the ether of the other world, and then now there's even ether, a digital cryptocurrency, a cryptocurrency. But how do they do it? Well, they use these weapons of fraud, and we've identified, looking at fraud transcripts and analyzing scams and frauds as they happen, we wanted to know if we could figure out what are these weapons of fraud and how do they lead to that ethereal state. And I'm up on the screen, you'll see a handful of weapons. These are all different types of tactics that are used very legitimately by marketers, but also nefariously by the con criminals. And that's what we want to make sure you understand. And so we'll start right in the middle of the screen there, source credibility. Well, Supa mentioned my biography. In fact, he's introduced each of us presenters with our biography. And this is meant in part to be a shortcut to trust. It's a way for you to see that we have some expertise and that maybe you should be listening. But we sort of build our source credibility all around us all the time. We do it with the badges that we wear, the uniforms that we wear, the certificates on the wall, or our business cards. So source credibility is that shortcut to trust. And it's meant to get us to listen to the pitch. Another weapon of fraud is phantom riches. And phantom riches are those guarantees that Tom was talking about, the risk-free guarantees. It's maybe telling us that with this investment or with this particular lottery winning, we will be able to pay for our child's college education without taking on any debt, or perhaps our grandchild's. It's that thing that we desire. It's more of a sort of whatever our wishes are. That's the phantom rich. Now, I'll go off to upper right side and talk a little about reciprocity. Reciprocity is if you give something, or if I give you something, then you should give me something in return. And we see reciprocity at play with free dinners, free meals, free books. When you're watching television, you may see that, if you call now, we'll give you this extra thing for free or a discount. These are all reciprocity plays. Now, reciprocity can be a very nice thing in our society, and we're taught it from a young age. In fact, I find that I'm teaching my children reciprocity. When they receive something from a friend for their birthday, you say, oh, you feel like you need to make sure that you're also giving something in return. Well, when it comes to fraud and scams, this tactic is misused and misapplied to get us to feel obligated. So maybe you've been to a free dinner with someone And in return, you feel obligated to answer the phone call the next time they call, or to have that cup of coffee where the real pitch ensues. Social consensus. Tom was talking a little bit about affinity fraud, and social consensus is highly at play when it comes to affinity fraud. Social consensus is when others like us or others that we aspire to are doing something, we're more likely to do it too. Now, I believe we all believe that we are individuals and we can make our own decisions, but we are swayed by the decisions of others. And one of the problems with social consensus is following the herd is that we believe that somebody else has already done that homework. And Tom was talking about some of the steps you should take. Kathy talked about it too. And so social consensus can be very dangerous when we think somebody else has taken that homework step and we believe that everything must be okay just because other people are doing it. And the last tactic I'll talk about today, there are many at play in scams, is scarcity. Now, sometimes we see the going out of business signs. That's a form of scarcity. It's a marketing tactic and it may be legitimate, but it may also go on sometimes 3 years advertising that they're going out of business. And this is a tactic that gets us to believe that we have to act now. When it comes to all scams, there is some form of scarcity. It's a scarcity of time, scarcity of product, or even exclusivity can be a form of scarcity. And what happens with scarcity is after all these tactics are at play, our emotions are heightened. And when the scarcity tactic comes, our gut wrenches and we say, oh no, I'm going to miss out on that phantom rich that they promised me. And that's when it's really dangerous. Next slide, please. So let's look at this in action. Hopefully you can see up on your screen today an example of this. In this case, it was a free meal seminar. Now, I'm not saying this particular marketer was a fraud, although this was something that Finra investigated as a sales tactic violations. But you can see all the tactics in play. You're invited for a complimentary, this is gourmet dinner. There's no obligation. These are actually reciprocity plays. I'm being very nice. I'm giving you something, and I'm hoping that after this free meal, you will want to return my call. You will give me your money to invest. We also see, as you scroll down a little bit, you see phantom riches. We're eliminating risk for you. Our clients never lose. This is a safe place to put your IRA. So they're playing on our desire for safety and our desire for high return and little risk. Social consensus. Our clients never lose. I want to be one of those clients that never loses. So that's a play on social consensus. And certainly scarcity is at play as well. Only 1% of people know about this. Now, I ask you to question in that moment, why am I part of the 1%? Have I been selected for this? And most likely this mailer came, it might have your name, or it might even just say resident of Fairfax County. Why? Who was selected for this 1%? So you can start to see how the tactics are in play. And you may recognize these from other types of materials you receive in the mail. And that's not to say that everything you receive for marketing is being deceptive. It's just to say that it's used to generate that emotional ether so that we make emotional and not rational decisions. Next slide. And we hear this from victims that we talk to as well. These are some examples of what the fraud victims tell us. When we speak to them about their experiences, they seemed official, source credibility. I was under time pressure, scarcity. I thought that person was nice, and I was worried about missing out on an opportunity. So there's actually there's several things at play there. I was worried about missing out on an opportunity. That's FOMO, fear of missing out, right? That's a scarcity play as well. And when we've done a lot of research, often with AARP, sometimes with the SEC and many other organizations, we find that people that have not been victimized in scams, or at least about the scams that they're talking to us about that day, were much less likely to agree with those kinds of statements. The victims were much more likely to say these kinds of tactics were at play in the scam in particular that they were victimized by. And you may even recognize this the call out here in red sounded like a sheriff's deputy, and he was threatening me with immediate arrest if I didn't comply. I know my mother-in-law called me one day and said, I got this call. What should I do? I know it's probably a scam and I want to talk to you about it, but it still made me mad and I'm worried that the police are coming to my door. Now, she did a wonderful thing, which was calling someone to double check, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. Next slide. Now, emotions are at play. I talked about the types of tactics that are used to elicit these emotionals. And we wanted to see in some of our research with Stanford University, we wanted to see if we could actually identify either in the brain. So could we identify these moments of heightened emotional states when people are being presented with deceptive advertising? And we found that whether you're in a heightened emotional state of excitement or the heightened emotional state of anger or even fear or being fearful or afraid, we tend to have the same reactions, and particularly older adults. So in this particular study, we found a higher reaction from the older adults. And we saw in their brain scans, actual activation in those emotional centers when they were presented with deceptive advertising. So this happens sort of without our consent. Our body reacts emotionally. And so some of the steps that we'll need to take are pulling us out of those emotional moments before we make some decisions. Next slide. Now, what role do biases play? We talked about emotion and that psychology of the scam and the persuasion that's being provided. But we all have inherent attitudes and biases that have been ingrained in us from our upbringing and our life. Next slide. Now, one of the studies we've been doing recently with the Better Business Bureau relates to mental frames and attitudes. And this is looking at how the attitudes and the behavior and the mental frames that we carry in our brains, how those impact our choices and our decisions. And what we find is there are 4 essential points when it comes to frauds and scams, that our attitudes can be very present us with challenges when it comes to fraud experiences. And some of these attitudes make us potentially more susceptible than others. And I've put up on the screen 4 different types of mental frames. So one is compliance. Are you someone that believes that you must follow the rule of authority? Now, in some places, that's excellent. And I'm sure the Fairfax County Police watching today are glad that you have that sense of compliance. Others may believe that compliance is a bit optional and, it's on a whim whether they want to follow a rule or not. Or intelligence. Intelligence is not about your pure intelligence level, but are you someone that believes that asking questions make you appear smarter? Or are you someone that believes that knowing all the answers and presenting as if you know all the answers makes you appear smarter? And you can see how some of these play out, and I've highlighted in red on the screen which factors lead to higher susceptibility to scam in our research. So individuals that believe that compliance is a duty for societal order are more likely to be challenged when they are presented with an IRS imposter scam or a Social Security imposter scam, because it feels very real. There's a sense of I must comply, and you're being threatened in a way that pulls at your natural attitude and belief towards compliance. I'll call out opportunities beliefs here. Opportunity is the sense that do we believe that wealth is gained through lucky breaks, or are we someone that has a stronger sense that all wealth or success is earned, and I have to work hard no matter what, and I'm never going to be successful without earning it. Nothing comes for free. And we find that individuals that believe have sort of a mental frame that lucky breaks are the way to achieve wealth or success are more susceptible to pitches related to sweepstakes and lottery scams. And you can see how these play out. The same happens with personal responsibility versus karma. Am I individually responsible for my success, or is it that a karmatic world and I'm due something good today because I've done good things in the past. And so maybe this is my lucky break, and maybe this is my time to achieve a good outcome. Next slide. The problem is, these are all attitudes that we have, and we all probably are somewhere in the middle in all those attitudes. But part of the problem is that we all have a biased blind spot. We have a tendency, Kathy talked about the illusion of invincibility, and we sometimes say the illusion of invulnerability. We have a tendency to believe that our neighbor or the person across the street or the person that's isolated at home is more susceptible than we are. And what we don't acknowledge is that we all have our vulnerabilities. It's just it depends what the pitch is and what kinds of tactics are being used to target us. And in some of our other research, we found that 80% of people believe that they are above average at spotting fraud. Now, I'm no mathematician, but 80% above average is unlikely. And so we really need to acknowledge that we all have vulnerabilities and we all have a biased blind spot. When we believe we are invincible, we are that much more vulnerable. Next slide. And our biases are particularly strong in certain instances. When information is complex, Tom was talking a little bit about cryptocurrency and digital assets, and I don't know about you, but I'm still really getting my head around that space. So when information is complex, whether it's investments or cryptocurrencies, when there's a high degree of risk and uncertainty of an outcome, but we desire a positive outcome. So when we have a strong desire for the positive, but it's very uncertain and risky and complex. And when we have conflicting priorities. So maybe something that feels good in the short term is not good for our long term, or vice versa. Something that might be good in the long term doesn't feel great in the short term. And so when these factors are at play, our biases are especially strong. And that is when we tend to react at that emotional gut level. And so all of the tactics that are being thrown at us with different types of scams are meant to get us to react in that emotional, sort of natural, instinctive, biased state, and to keep us out of that rational state. So what can you do to make sure you're making an informed decision? Next slide. I'm going to provide you with a couple more tips. I know the other presenters today provided some tips, but hopefully these will reinforce for you some of the most important steps you can take to avoid being victimized by scams and to protect others in your community and in your family. Next slide. The first tip is to build your defenses, and you're paying attention to this program today is such a great start, because what we have found in actual research is that knowing about the methods of scams in general, so the methods I was just talking about and Tom and Kathy talked about, is a protective layer. Now, having experience with scams is also, and unfortunately, if you have had an experience with a scam, and maybe it didn't turn out to your benefit, unfortunately, that might have been a good learning opportunity. And hopefully it has sort of helped build your defenses even further. But knowing about a specific scam is even more powerful. So the work that we're all doing together to keep the word alive about what types of scams are out there helps build the defenses of our community. And we do find that prior knowledge really reduces engagement. And engagement is the first step to vulnerability to scams. Next slide. So I like to say, don't before you do. Don't take action in the moment. Some of this is a restatement of some of the things that Tom just said. But really frame this. Don't take action in the moment. Why? Because we are in a heightened emotional state when we're presented with advertising and pitches, and maybe we've been in a conversation with someone, and it's very powerful. So if you give yourself a cooling off period, 12 hours, 24 hours, a week, 2 weeks, whatever it is, step back, you can make a more informed decision. We also say not to engage with unsolicited outreach. It is highly unlikely that generic email to resident Fairfax County would help me be in that 1% of people that know about something, right? So if something has been unsolicited, you need to be particularly wary Do not ask to unsubscribe. When you get emails or voicemails or and it says click here to unsubscribe, unless it's something that you subscribe to, don't click those links. Because when you hit unsubscribe, what you've done is validate that you have an actual email address and that you're a responder. And as was previously mentioned, you'll get onto a list of hot targets. Don't click on unexpected links. I receive a lot of invitations on Facebook with friend requests of random people I've never heard of. These are very, very, very likely romance scams of some sort. And so do not click unexpected links in text, in email, and certainly not in any of your social media feeds. If it's not coming, if it's not something that you expected or coming from a friend that you've verified sent you something, don't click it. And don't purchase gift cards or go to cryptocurrency ATMs to pay for any sort of service fee, or if somebody's claiming that you have to do that before you win the lottery, for instance, or to make sure the police don't come and arrest you. These are the hallmarks of a scam. So what can you do? I already said slow down decision making, slow it down, step out of the ether, ignore those calls. Sign up for spam and call blocker services. Your telephone company probably has that. More and more today, there's opportunities, or just don't answer the phone and always wait for a voicemail and call someone back. Verify links before clicking. So sometimes you might get a messenger app on social media that's someone says, hey, did you see this? And you haven't heard from this friend in months or this family member in forever. You say, wow, I'm surprised they sent me something. Well, why don't you text them separately and say, hey, did you send me a link today? Because that's also the hallmark of somebody's hijacking of their social media accounts. And only use official numbers. Look for the S, the S for safety or security, excuse me. So HTTPS means it's a secure URL. Look for those symbols. There's sometimes a little lock symbol on your browser window. And only use official numbers and URLs. So for instance, if you receive an email or a text from your credit card company, go to the credit card and go to the phone number on the back or the URL that you would normally use to log into your account and go in that way to verify information is actually true. And if there is a fraud alert, for instance, happening, their fraud department or on your the app or on the website, it'll probably have that same fraud alert. And then you'll know it's legitimate and they really need your response. And Tom said this, I'm going to say it again, verify, verify, and I'll just say it one more time, verify. Next up. And consider your source. We know that I mentioned source credibility and social consensus are very powerful tactics. And social media and news media and all of the opportunities that we have to hear information today can overwhelm us with an inability to decipher sort of what's true and what's not. So I want you to step back and say, what is the source of the information? Is this somebody they already know? Is this somebody who just came to me out of the blue? Is this an investment newsletter? And is there proper disclosures that this is actually a paid service? Are you at a cocktail party or at a club meeting of some sort? And are people talking about a specific investment or a specific opportunity? Is it someone that you're following on YouTube or other social media? And we call them the finfluencers, financial influencers. Is it someone of that sort? And what gives them the credibility to provide this information to you? We find social media is ripe with investment information these days and with scam information. And some of it takes us down the dark path and some of it can be very helpful. So you just need to say, what is this source? How reliable is this? And how can I verify that information? Next slide. Check for red flags. So some of the red flags have been mentioned today, and I've got a couple of new ones for you. We've already said unsolicited lots of times. That really is one of your biggest offenses here, is recognizing you didn't ask for something, it came to you. If it came to you and you weren't looking for it, you don't need it. Pay to play, gift cards, cryptocurrency. If you have to pay in advance for a lottery or sweepstakes, if you have to pay your back taxes via cryptocurrency, then this is a scam. emotional pleas with unverifiable claims, little or no pressure and time pressure. We talked about all these types of tactics that are building that emotional experience. And I also like to say familiar names in unfamiliar places. You may find that the names of celebrities or individuals that you know are being touted as involved in a specific scheme, or, oh, you know, they all buy this product or this service and therefore it must be good. Just be very, very careful that you're not letting that sway to the decision of what's important to you and to your financial circumstances. Next slide. And play that devil's advocate. I have a lot of things on the screen here, so it may be overwhelming. So I'll just talk these through. Just think for a second and say, I know I might want it to be true, some positive outcome, but what could go wrong? What if this is a scam? Think through these questions. How can I verify this information? And do I feel pressured or emotional? So there's sort of one aspect of things. And then you have to say, do I have to pay a fee up front? That's a red flag. Can I afford to lose this money? And then the last one on the lower corner there, it says, hi, friend, have you ever heard of this? In our studies, we've found that just voicing to someone else, hey, I had this pitch, or I received this offer, or I got this phone call, can, one, for ourselves, help elicit those red flags, but two, build, you sort of benefit from the collective knowledge of others. So when I talked about building defenses, if your friend has built their defenses and they've heard of that specific scam, or maybe your family member, they can help you decipher those red flags as well. Next slide. Check independent sources. We said verify. One place you can go for great information, particularly related to investing and investment schemes, is Finra.org. Finra is the parent company that I work for, Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, so FINRA.org. Finra.org has a wealth of information on investing, from giving you some smart investing modules if you're new to investing, to more complex products and digital assets, to understanding how to protect your money as well. Tom already mentioned investor.gov as a great resource. Kathy mentioned AARP.org and the Fraud Watch Network as a great place. The Federal Trade Commission has a tremendous amount of information about scams and consumer protection materials. I encourage you to get to know their website, ftc.gov. And the Better Business Bureau also offers the Scam Tracker database. And Scam Tracker is a place where you can report scams, also as the Fraud Watch Network. And you can report a scam, and you can also see what types of scams are happening in your community. So you can use these maps and drill down and see if maybe your neighbors or your friends are getting the same sort of pitch as you are. And that's another red flag. Next slide. Another tool to use, particularly when it comes to investment professionals, is Finra Broker Check. A broker check is a free online tool from Finra that allows you to look up the registration status, disciplinary history, if there is one, and employment history for brokers and brokerage firms. Now, it also connects to the SEC's investment advisor database, which is populated with SEC information as well as state securities regulator information. So you can see in one location whether there's any flags that you would want to be on the lookout when it comes to investment professionals. So any investment professional you've worked with, you're continuing to work with, or you're considering working with, we encourage you to check Finra Broker Check in advance. Next slide. And please report your concerns. We've mentioned lots of different places today that you can report those concerns. Better Business Bureau Scam Tracker, AARP's Fraud Watch Network, FINRA, the SEC, the Federal Trade Commission. And if you have specific questions related to investing, and maybe you're not sure if it's a concern, but you have an account statement and you're not sure what's going on, or you just have some questions, you're welcome to call the Finra Securities Helpline for Seniors, 844-574-3577. The number's up on the screen right now, 844-574-3577. And we'll be happy to take your questions and refer you to another source as necessary, or help you understand what kinds of things may be going on in your investment accounts. Next slide. And with that, I encourage you to be a fraud fighter. You taking your step today to attend today's program is a great start in building your defenses and recognizing fraud and scams. And we encourage you to share that information with others. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine, for an informative presentation. Let's see if we have any questions from our audience. Trudy.
You know I do. Christine, the first question is, I think you just answered it, but you said it rather quickly. Does Finra report potential crimes to the appropriate government agencies and/or law enforcement?
Absolutely. And I would say more and more every day. FINRA, the SEC, the state securities regulators, we really consider ourselves jurisdiction neutral in terms of taking a complaint, and we want to make sure that you receive the help you need. If FINRA detects something that of criminal violation, we make referrals all the time to the FBI. We refer things off to the Securities and Exchange Commission. Again, they're civil. Just FINRA also is can only bring civil actions, but we refer them up to the Department of Justice, the FBI, and others as necessary.
Great. One of our viewers has said, I haven't heard anything about scams affecting those for whom English is not their primary language. Are they more prone to scams, and how would they get help from AARP, SEC, or FINRA? I'll let you handle FINRA. When you're done, I'll talk about how AARP handles it.
Okay, sure. Well, Tom mentioned affinity fraud. So everyone has different types of scams that they're targeted for in different ways. And non-English speaking populations are certainly also targeted for certain types of schemes and by individuals who may purport to be part of your community and in fact, just building that trust relationship. So absolutely, all of the same types of scams can apply. Sometimes individuals will prey on the fact that you may not know as much about certain proceedings in the United States. Maybe there's distrust of government from a cultural understanding from a country that you may have come from. And so in those cases, those fraudsters will target your vulnerability. So they may pitch situations that specifically make you fearful of the government, or that prey on sort of those preconceived notions that you have. They may shortcut the trust to you by speaking in your language, and that's not necessarily a reason to trust someone. And so certainly there are all the same factors at play, and when we have an affinity with a certain type of group, it often lowers our defenses, and we need to keep them up even still. FINRA does offer Spanish-speaking assistance on our Fleiner Securities Helpline for seniors, so certainly welcome to call that. I know the SEC does as well, and I believe AARP does as well, but I'll let you handle that, Trudy.
Okay, yes, we do. On the Fraud Watch Network, because I'm one of the individuals that fields those calls, anytime we have an individual who needs help in another language, we do use a translation service to help us provide help and assistance to those individuals as well. The next question is, does FINRA report your investigation back to the broker in question?
I will just say that's not a one answer kind of thing. It depends on the situation and what's at play. Certainly, brokers do know when they're being investigated by FINRA in some capacity. The firm, it might rise to the compliance officer or the branch manager. It really depends on the situation. But absolutely, if there is some sort of formal complaint at some point, if they're being investigated, they will need to be approached and contacted.
Along the same lines, another guest has indicated the company that manages their 401k went bankrupt. Can FINRA help understand what happens next and what happens to their money?
Yes, I would encourage you to call the Finra Securities Helpline for seniors. And that number was on my slide. It's 844. Ooh, I don't have it up. Oh, right there it is. Thank you. 574-3577. You know, when you're on the spot, those numbers are hard to remember. 844-574-3577. I would encourage you to call the helpline, and the SEC also has does take calls, the Securities and Exchange Commission. So one of us could help direct you to the proper place. There is something called SIPC, which is an insurance protection for securities accounts. And so depending upon the situation, there may be an opportunity for an insurance claim through SIPC, but particularly with bankruptcy and folding up a firm. But I would encourage you to seek one-on-one counsel to figure out whether your situation applies.
Okay. Similar to that, the next question is, there seems to be a lot of fees and transaction money being charged by my investment company. Can I call Finra to see if these fees are reasonable and legitimate?
Yes, you could try our Finra Securities Helpline for Seniors again to talk that through. Now, you'll also want to understand what you agree to with your firm. And on BrokerCheck and through the SEC's Investment Advisor Database, you can download something called the Form CRS. That's the Customer Relationship Summary. And on your Form CRS for your account, it will tell you what types of fees and services you are receiving and paying. And so you'll want to take a look at that Form CRS and see if this is something that you've already agreed to and what situations that applies to. But you'll also want to look at your accounts and see if you think maybe there's some unnecessary additional trading happening to generate excess commissions. And that's something that FINRA and the SEC would take very seriously to look at when it comes to a firm in violation, because it's their role not to, it's their job not to generate excess commissions to your downfall. So you need to make sure that if you see something happening that you think you didn't authorize, maybe you didn't give them transactional authority and they're trading in your account to generate excess fees, you want to see that on your account statements and certainly raise that as a complaint as necessary, or even look into it for sure.
Very good. The next question is, can BrokerCheck verify if my investment person is actually licensed to sell investments?
Yes, that is a perfect reason to use BrokerCheck. And Tom mentioned that the idea that unregistered individuals are trying to pitch investments. When we see unregistered individuals pitching investments, one, they're violating securities laws, but two, that's where we see a lot of the Ponzi schemes and a lot of the investment frauds. So the very first step is just to make sure that they are licensed and registered with FINRA, the SEC, or the state securities regulator. And you can find that in BrokerCheck. That's finra.org/BrokerCheck. Or you can just Google BrokerCheck. And there's a URL there that says brokercheck.finra.org. Either one gets you there. Or even if you just go to FINRA's homepage, finra.org, you'll find BrokerCheck right there because it's our biggest used tool. And what you will be looking for is, one, are they registered? Have they ever been registered? So maybe they're not registered now, they're pitching you investment. And if they've been registered before, their name will show up and it'll say barred. Don't ever work with someone that has been barred from the securities industry. And if they're not in BrokerCheck, you want to say, well, why aren't they? What kind of investment professional are they? Now, it could be that they're an insurance agent. Now, insurance agents don't show up in BrokerCheck unless they are also licensed as a securities agent. But it's important for you to know what kind of financial professional you're working with. And you can verify insurance professionals with your state insurance authorities.
Great. The last question is kind of broad-based, so I'm gonna limit and try to limit your response to it as well. They're asking if there are any special tips to protect our investments. How about if I rephrase that to Christine? What are your top 3 tips for protecting your investments?
All right, let's see. Top tip, I just said it. Only work with licensed and registered individuals. Absolutely. And so if you're maybe you're a do-it-yourself investor, but you're using some sort of app or platform, you're still working with a brokerage firm, whether even just to transact. So make sure they're licensed and registered and that they don't have violations or a lot of customer complaints, because those can be really problematic experiences and we want you to protect your money. So that's one of the very first things. The other is to pay attention. You need to, I know we get a lot of mail and now we get a lot of our statements through email, and it says go here to open it and you have to enter your password. So you may not look at your account statements all the time. We know that. But there's really important information in there. So it's important that you pay attention. So take a look at your statements. Make sure that the investments are still what you thought they were, that they're performing appropriately, that there's not additional trading happening that you're unaware of, or that there hasn't been, there aren't securities missing from your account, which does happen sometimes. So make sure to look at your statements. So I already said, let's see, only work with registered professionals. Make sure to look at your statements. And the last is just do your homework. Know what you're investing in. And if it's confusing, Tom mentioned this, if it's really confusing and it's something that you don't understand, limit your risk. So if you still want to invest in it, make sure you're not risking your mortgage money. Make sure you're not risking that payment for your child's schooling. Make sure that it's money that you can afford to lose. And, even more so, perhaps just don't invest in things you don't understand. There's plenty of opportunity in the legitimate marketplace to find investments that can help us reach our long-term goals. And taking additional risk is just that. And you need to decide what you can afford and, what helps you sleep at night.
Perfect. Thank you, Christine. Christine, that's all the questions that I have for you. I do have two other questions in the Q&A and the chat box that really fall back into my world of Fraud Watch Network. And that is, how can we stop unwanted texts? And how can we stop unwanted email? And the best advice that I can give to you is to check with your cell phone provider. They are the best resources for preventing unwanted callers and unwanted text, and the service provider for your email, whether that's AOL, Google, who else is out there, all the different networks that are out there. The provider of that service is the best resource for providing information about unwanted text, emails, and what have you for that particular format. And I have done with my questions. I'm back to you, Suba.
If you would like to share this program with your friends or family, it will be available on demand on AARP Virginia's Facebook page, website, and YouTube channel, as well as Fairfax County Government Channel 16. I would like to take this opportunity to thank all our speakers today, the staff at Channel 16, the Fairfax County government staff, and the Silver Shield Task Force for their assistance in bringing this virtual program to you. And thank you to all our AARP staff and volunteers on screen and behind the scenes. Visit aarp.org for more information on the Fraud Watch Network. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and don't forget to subscribe to our AARP podcast, The Perfect Scam, available wherever you download your favorite podcasts. Thank you for joining us today. Stay safe, and remember, if you can spot a scam, you can stop a scam.